I just got an intriguing email from a source. The subject line is vague. It asks, "Seen this?" There's no text, just an old photo. It's a group picture, quite formal, the kind of thing you get at the end of a school year. The caption says, "Fru Portrait." This is a photo of the Army's Clandestine Force Research Unit, Britain's top spies in the Troubles. They're mostly men who are dressed in smart military clothes, but they've got shaggy hair and moustaches. There's one woman with a thick 1980s fringe and a floor-length white dress. Right in the middle, there's a man I've heard a lot about. He has thin sandy hair, and his hands are balled into fists, resting on his knees. He's staring straight into the camera. This man is the head of the Fru, Colonel Gordon Kerr.
Probably the closest thing to James Bond.
He was obviously a bit of a buccaneer.
Oh my God, he is nothing but trouble wherever he goes. Arrogance of the man too.
There were stories about him ordering the exhumation, digging up of graves in the early hours to see if evidence had been buried in a coffin.
And you say Kerr is the archetypal spy, a spook,
Sure.
and a master of dirty tricks and dirty wars, backstabbing, double-dealing and underhand tactics and morals.
I think that's a fair summation of the tactics of Brigadier Kerr, definitely.
Gordon Kerr's from Scotland. On his first tours to Northern Ireland, he takes a shine to undercover work.
Dons civvies, grows his hair long so he can fit in with the civilian population.
That's Neil Mackay, the reporter who unmasked the agent steak knife. Gordon excels as a spy and is posted to the front lines of the Cold War in Germany.
His tactics were, and this is a direct quote, pointlessly aggressive and confrontational.
He soon gains a reputation with the East German secret police.
He was sort of notorious for being a maverick, for pushing things to the nth degree.
With this reckless attitude, Gordon returns to Belfast in 1987. He's just 39, but is now one of the UK's most senior spies. Head of the Fru.
Turning agents, handling agents, and the manipulation of agents was key to his work.
Gordon ramps up the Fru's work. He oversees the rat hole and their running of the IRA double agent, Freddie Scappaticci. And he sends Brian Nelson back into the UDA against the wishes of MI5.
And it is around this time that people start to die in Northern Ireland at the hands of loyalist terror gangs who were being aided and abetted by the security forces, including the Fru.
Things get so bad that Fru handlers later accuse him
of colluding with death squads, of directing terror effectively at one arm's removal.
One soldier goes as far as saying,
Kerr had no moral qualms about anything that we were up to, and he knew of every decision taken by his men.
"I need to track down the people in this photo to understand how Gordon Kerr and his unit came to run agents who were involved in systematic murder. I want to know if Brian Nelson and Freddie Scappaticci were rogue outliers working in the shadows, or if their behaviour was part of something much bigger and even darker." I'm Cara McGugan, and this is Bed of Lies, Episode 5, Handlers. From the start of my reporting, I knew it wasn't going to be easy to track down handlers. Their identities are protected, for their own safety and for national security, and secrecy laws prevent them from speaking. But a few names have been made public, so I start building a list of leads and making calls.
Hello.
Hi, I'm looking to speak to Ian.
Yes, speaking. I don't think you're going to bring it to a wider audience.
Which other handlers do you know?
I've met about 10 or 15
People are always very, very suspicious. You're doing it because you want to sell your podcast.
I'm not in for sensationalism. I would not be happy at all just sitting in a podcast between what Nelson allegedly did or didn't do and what the steak knife was allegedly responsible for.
You haven't got any sort of whistleblower type sources who help you, do you, from the kind of security services side?
A whistleblower from the security forces, possibly someone who we could go on the record, yeah.
If I can persuade these people to sort of speak, I'll have a go at them.
Thank you.
It's a story worth telling, and if it's done in a realistic and balanced and limited way, it might do some good down the line.
Can you, off the top of your head, remember any parliamentary investigation into mass murder in Northern Ireland?
No.
I can't. No, because there's no appetite for it. So forgive me for being a little bit dismissive.
It's fair to say I'm not having much luck. Then one day, after nearly a year of reporting, my phone rings. I don't recognise the number, but I grab my recorder as the person starts talking. He's a former soldier from the FRU, one of the men in the photo, with shaggy hair and a handlebar moustache. He uses the pseudonym
Rob Lewis.
Hi, thank you for giving me a call.
No problem.
Yes.
I plan to meet Rob a couple of days later at his London club. It's in a grey tower block just south of the River Thames.
This is the Union Jack Club in Waterloo. It's for veterans and serving forces people.
We walk towards the library.
Up there you have a display area where people who have been awarded the Victoria Cross and the George Medal.
Anything on your unit or regiment in here?
No, far too secret.
I've seen a picture of the FRU's secretive plaque. It's green and gold, embossed with a gladiator holding a trident and a dead fish. Underneath, there's a motto, Fishers of Men. That's also the title of Rob's autobiography.
Fishers of Men took me 4 nights to write and a year to get published. The MOD said that a number of things that I had written about breached national security. It's a bit of a nonsense because the MOD are a bully, basically.
The Ministry of Defence combed through Rob's manuscript and took out everything it deemed a risk.
I'm quite happy to talk about the job that I did. What I won't do, though, for my own sort of protection, I know that sounds quite a strong word, is breach anything that I think may threaten national security.
What could be the risk if you did do something that breached national security?
The Ministry of Defence could take me to court. I could go back to prison again.
He was imprisoned for hacking as a private investigator after leaving the FRU. I don't think he'll mind me saying, he's a bit of a rogue. Before we properly start, I ask if he'd like a drink.
I'll have a large Jameson's and ice, please.
Did this Jameson habit come from when you were in Northern Ireland?
No, it actually came from my Irish grandmother, who allowed me, rather absurdly, to drink Jameson's and smoke, because I'm a smoker as well, with her from when I was about 12 years of age.
Rob's pushed the boundaries ever since he was a child.
My brother and I had a bit of a reputation as being a couple of tearaways.
In the Welsh mining town where they grew up.
Our little gang's rule 1 was don't get caught. That was the catchphrase.
A catchphrase that seems equally fitting for the FRU. Rob joined the army after leaving school. It appealed more than going down the mines. He was soon dispatched to Northern Ireland.
For me, it was all about fighting terrorism.
After a few tours, he moved to the Intelligence Corps. One day, an officer approached him about a new, highly secretive role.
He said there's an organisation called the FRU, which is FRU, which is the Force Research Unit, and he said you would be perfect for the FRU.
Had you ever heard of the FRU at that point?
Nope, not at all. Never heard of it. Didn't even know it existed.
And you were already working in intelligence in Northern Ireland.
Yep.
So if anyone knew about it.
But it was, and I'm not embellishing this at all, that unit was so secret that even working in the intelligence community, I never knew of its existence.
Rob was invited to the FRU's headquarters at a secret location in the Kent countryside.
I can speak about this now because it's no longer there. It used to be a place called The Manor.
He had no idea what he was getting himself into.
I attended FRU selection completely blind.
His first inkling of what the FRU did came when a senior officer asked him
whether I would have any problem with paying somebody, even a terrorist, money for information. And I didn't have a problem with that at all.
Roguish Rob had found a perfect fit. The FRU had been set up a decade earlier, in 1979. Margaret Thatcher wanted to get the Troubles under control after a series of catastrophic IRA attacks. She brought the former head of MI6 out of retirement, and he came up with an idea for the FRU, an army unit that would recruit agents from inside the paramilitaries. Its aim, to get intelligence and to crush the IRA by turning its fighters on each other.
The tradecraft was to be able to target, recruit, and run human beings to become informants. And the higher up the chain you could get, the better. But if you could recruit somebody who was a terrorist by whatever means, then obviously that's, the cream on the cake.
Rob changed his clean-cut military appearance, just like his new boss, Gordon Kerr, had once done.
I had long hair. I dressed rather scruffily.
Behind this scruffy look was an elite soldier.
It's going to sound a bit gung-ho, but I had a Browning 9mm pistol in my belt at all times, 2 spare ammunition magazines on the other side of the belt. In my car, a Heckler & Koch MP5K machine gun. On my backseat, HK-53, a serious bit of work. A Heckler & Koch HK-3. This may not mean much to you. 7.62. And at home, under my bed, HK-53. Yeah, surrounded by arms and ammunition 24 hours a day. If somebody shot at me, they are the ones who are going to die, not me.
Did you ever have to shoot anyone?
I'd rather not go into that.
Rob was based in Enniskillen, a castle town that's an hour and a half's drive west of Belfast. At any time, his division ran 8 or so agents.
We would do a lot of research on a target who had the potential to be an informant, and we'd find out about, were they overdrawn in the bank? Did they have any family problems? Did they need, as absurd as it sounds, new tyres for their car? Because there's a chink in everybody's armour, and then we'd go for it.
They weren't supposed to use bribery or coercion, but I've heard it did sometimes happen. Rob's spies were more peripheral figures on the edges of the IRA, like family members and neighbours. One of them was a woman he calls Busty Brenda.
My publisher said, you need to make Brenda sexy, mate.
So Brenda was not busty?
No. She was a big girl, but with wellies and a barber jacket and smelt of cow dung. Not a bit like I described in the book.
Brenda was a farmer from a Republican area who had been sympathetic to the IRA. That changed in 1988 when she saw footage of 2 corporals being killed by a mob after they drove into an IRA funeral procession. When a British Army patrol next visited her home, she told them
how disgusted she was with what had happened.
The soldiers tipped off the Fru. Brenda could be a willing source. What were her contacts like?
Very good. She was very well in with an IRA quartermaster who controlled weapons and ammunition.
Rob had an idea for how she could get more information on IRA weapons by getting even closer to the quartermaster.
I convinced her to go and sleep with him. They had a relationship previously anyway, and I convinced her to rekindle that relationship and get some more information out of him.
Why did you think it needed to be a romantic relationship?
Well, pillow talk works, because he was quite chatty. So he would boast to her about what he had access to. General arms, ammunition, explosives.
Brenda noticed her so-called boyfriend was receiving letters from Libya, a country notorious for arming the IRA. So she started stealing his post and giving it to Rob.
We would then get that mail flown across to Heathrow, given to the spooks. That letter would then be back in my hands by end of play that day, resealed. I would then give it back to her, and she would then drop it in his doorway.
Brenda was taking a great risk. If the quartermaster or his IRA comrades suspected her, she could be captured by the nutting squad. Freddie Scapatici or his colleagues could strip, beat, and interrogate her. She wasn't in the IRA, but the punishment could still be death. Did you ever worry about Brenda getting caught?
I never allowed myself to become emotionally attached to any of my informants, because at the end of the day, if one of, and this does sound quite mercenary and quite awful, if one of my informants was to be executed by the IRA tomorrow, I needed to be able to move on the next day.
Did you ever have conversations with your sources about the risk to them, where they were worried and they came to you about that?
No, not ever. No, because that way you'd lose your informant.
But Rob did follow through guidelines for protecting agents, and checking their information was accurate.
We used to have a thing called the rule of 6.
6 people had to verify intelligence, like where a gun was buried or when an attack was going to happen, before the Fru could act on it.
One of those people being our informant, so it wasn't automatically thrown back at her.
These protections didn't always work, as I know from the stories of Joe Fenton and Sandy Lynch, who were tortured by the nutting squad. What sort of sums of money were you paying people like Brenda?
Not a lot, because to give people like Brenda a lot of money would bring attention to them. I couldn't afford to have her go into the local pub and opening a bag or a purse or whatever and like having 300 quid. That would be out of place completely.
Instead, Rob had a savings book for Brenda.
She would say, I need 2 new tyres for the Land Rover. So I'd pay for 2 more new tyres.
It doesn't feel like very much for having a sexual relationship.
Well, time and place, that's what we did. And, she was agreeable to it.
That is, until the quartermaster asked her to marry him.
I think she was very torn. There was this massive sort of identity crisis about who or what she wanted to be. Luckily for me, I was on my last couple of months working at the Fru, and like I say, so being a bit mercenary, it wasn't my problem anymore. It was somebody else's problem. In all honesty, I don't really know what happened with that relationship.
Rob keeps a safe distance from the Fru's more nefarious work, like handling Brian Nelson.
Nelson was a rogue, obviously. We now know that. But I never had anything to do with Nelson.
And Freddie Scapatici.
I only actually found out about Scapatici after I'd left the army.
So after you've left the army, is that when the sort of Stevens inquiry starts up?
Yeah, because the Stevens inquiry, which I had a little bit to do with, not much, was about the fact that the FRU were coercing, if that's the right word, with loyalist paramilitaries, which I have to say I had absolutely nothing to do with. So I think it was a bit of a witch hunt, to be honest. I've been arrested on, 6 occasions. I've had armed police in my bedroom at 4 o'clock in the morning, pointing guns at me.
All in connection with the Stevens inquiry into the FRU. On that point, there is something I want to put to Rob that he might know more about. The origin of the fire at Detective John Stevens' office, the police headquarters at the edge of darkness. Multiple sources have told me the FRU was behind the fire, and they had the help of the Army's Special Forces, or SAS. The SAS had a covert methods of entry team, break-in experts, based in Ashford in Kent, along with the FRU. Not everyone believes the FRU did this. The official police reports concluded the fire was an accident, after all. But John Stevens and his team are sure of it. I've heard the name of someone who could have been part of that team from Ashford, Rob Lewis. Do you know what happened with the evidence being burnt down?
Nothing to do with me whatsoever. Although I have been questioned about that, and I've got a very good alibi.
And where were you?
I was in Kent on a course. I was actually back at the manor helping instruct on a course when that happened.
Do you think it was burnt down by Army intelligence?
It wouldn't surprise me. I'm not going to give a definite yes or no, but I can see reasons why certain governmental departments would have wanted Stevens to fail.
Is that the sort of thing that the intelligence units would do then?
For me to comment on that would be wrong.
Rob doesn't give me everything I need, but he does leave me with one firm impression. The FRU thrived in a moral grey zone. What was the culture of the FRU like?
Maverick. If you could save somebody's life, and if you could defeat a terrorist act, then they were quite happy for you to do anything you wanted.
They being the people at the top, including Colonel Gordon Kerr. In a stroke of luck, the same week I meet Rob, I get a call from another handler in that photo. Someone who knows a lot more about the FRU's maverick culture and their handling of Brian Nelson and Freddie Scapatici. Someone who's prepared to be very frank with me. More on that after this short break.
Hello, Claire Newell here, Investigations Editor at The Telegraph. I also sometimes host The Daily Tea Investigates, a strand of documentary episodes on another Telegraph podcast, The Daily Tea. For both Bed of Lies and the podcasts I work on, journalists spend months digging into complex stories, sifting through long documents to find the truth, and giving victims the space to tell their stories. And as a thank you for supporting our journalism, subscribers can binge this series of Bed of Lies now. For more information on how to connect your Telegraph subscription with Apple Podcasts, head to the link in the show notes.
There's a car coming up here fast. Is that... That looks like a Porsche to me. That's our guy. Nice grey Porsche. personalised number plate. Cara.
Hi, Cara. It's one of my company cars, to be honest with you, so it's...
Not a very subtle car, though.
Well, it's a little bit more subtle than my last one, which was a Ferrari 488 Spider. With the registration Spy 488F, so that wasn't very subtle.
This is Ian Hurst, a through handler I've been trying to meet for months. He's the whistleblower who revealed Freddie Scapatici was the agent's steak knife. For many years, Ian was known by the pseudonym Martin Ingram, because the Ministry of Defence banned him from using his real name. It was part of their draconian attempts to keep the full story hidden. But as the years passed, Ian decided it was safe to identify himself. We go to the office where Ian now runs a private investigations firm. He's brought sandwiches and snacks, knowing we could be here a while. Little do we realise we'll be here for the next 8 hours.
I have a hell of a lot to be appreciative of my service because the skill sets which I learned were invaluable to me.
Ian's a complicated character. Even after hours of talking to him, I still don't fully understand his motivations. He's one of the Frew's main adversaries, the person who exposed their biggest secret. But in many ways, he's still supportive of them.
I'll defend 99.9% of the Frew. Yeah. This is not a one-dimensional issue. I'm giving it you unvarnished. You can come to your own conclusion.
Despite everything, Ian's proud that he was handpicked for the elite unit.
I was a working-class lad that had failed my 11+.
He worked his way through the ranks of the British Army, earning favour on night shifts for the rat hole as they ran the agent's steak knife, and he landed himself a job as a handler.
It is very, very competitive, and we are colloquially known as the backstabbers. And if you're Mr. Pussy in the corner, you ain't going to advance.
He was posted to Enniskillen, the same castle town as Rob Lewis, where he thrived as a member of the Frew.
It was like a kiddie in Wonka's chocolate factory.
He had just the right skills. As Rob says,
honest opinion, a very, very good source handler, but a bit sneaky.
Were you all a bit sneaky?
Possibly.
I want to understand the Frew's maverick culture and whether this led to the atrocities I've been hearing about. It all starts with Colonel Gordon Kerr.
He was a bit controversial, but he was a brilliant guy, and I would still back him even now. Just a seriously top bloke.
Ian is more sceptical.
He was a good boss, but I think he had a blind side. Simple as that.
He says when Gordon Kerr took over the Frew in 1987, the atmosphere changed.
We had an email go round and asked us to detail what kit we needed to make our job easier. Money was no object, resources were there, plentiful. What can be done? And basically, the unwritten guidance given by Kerr is that the gloves are off. That was it.
With the gloves off, Gordon sent Frew soldiers to West Germany to pull Brian Nelson back to Northern Ireland and back into the UDA. With Gordon's blessing, Brian became even more ruthless, targeting one person after another for assassination.
Now, you may or may not know, but Gordon is a very proud Scot and a very proud loyalist. Now, therein lies that little conundrum about taking your dedication too far, and you lose the objectivity and the tradecraft, and it's masked by bigotry. And Brian Nelson's a case example.
Soldiers in the Frew were meant to keep the details of their agents totally secret. Ian shouldn't have known about Brian Nelson, but he knew Brian's handlers.
I shared a house with one of Brian Nelson's, and I went through training with one of Nelson's handlers.
And he was good at fishing for information.
I believe the handlers were being run by that agent. He was in control of the situation.
I've discovered who Brian Nelson's handlers were. He had a few over the years. Most of them are men who I can't name for legal reasons. But there is someone I can share more details on. They were especially close to Gordon Kerr. So close he became a mentor to them. It's the lone woman in that Frew portrait, standing right behind Gordon, the one in the white dress with the 1980s fringe. For a long time, she was known as Captain M, because the Ministry of Defence banned journalists from naming her. But slowly, her identity leaked out. She's Margaret Walshaw, known to most people as Mags. She's since changed her name. What was Mags like as a person?
Best operator I ever worked with. I always say this about women. When you get a good one, they're good. She was Rolls Royce. She was hands and feet, nose, everything above everybody else.
Clever.
Yeah. Manipulative, brave. She was top drawer. If I've got one criticism, it's single-mindedness. When you are breathing that oxygen in that community, I genuinely think she was too focused on the goal and lost sight of the moral compass.
Brian Nelson strayed outside the law at the request of his handlers, strayed so far that he was involved in murder plots and actual killings. But his handlers didn't rein him in. Instead, they helped him.
I knew that they were leaking information.
They verified and refined the intelligence he had in that suitcase, which he then used to target people for murder.
For a handler to knowingly give vehicle registration numbers, maps, routes, photographs, is inexcusable. That's a conspiracy. I believe a handler is exposing him or herself to a conspiracy charge. If I give somebody a vehicle registration number and a map to get to somebody's house, surely I'm involved in a conspiracy.
In many cases, a conspiracy to murder.
I don't think they consciously took a course of action which would have been detrimental to the interests of another person, consciously. I do think things happened in the Brian Nelson case which could have been handled better.
Brian's other handler, one I can't name, eventually became so concerned he told Gordon Kerr they should stand Brian down for a while. But Gordon refused, saying Brian's intelligence was too important. Hearing all this, Ian decided to intervene. One night, at a formal Frew dinner, he broke the rules of military hierarchy and approached Gordon.
I challenged him on the tradecraft.
Gordon replied calmly, but tersely.
It's called the greater good. And you can shove the greater good right up your ass. Because the greater good is not the greater good if it's your child, your mother, your father. You wouldn't pay that price. So why should you risk somebody else? And it epitomises exactly the mindset and what was wrong.
For the greater good, Brian took part in crimes to keep his cover. Crimes that included murder and conspiracy to murder.
And when all's said and done, he is a terrorist.
Nasty piece of work.
Absolutely. People died as a result of Brian Nelson. And bear in mind, our job is not to kill people, it is to protect both sides of a community.
I want to pick up on this idea of the greater good. The ends justify the means, because it's something I've heard a lot in my reporting.
I have no qualms about anything that I ever did when I was in the Frew, because I always thought it was, for the good and protected people.
Spies in terror groups were used to gather intelligence that could then be used to save lives. It's a calculation that's hard to quantify, the number of killings spies were involved in versus how many people they protected. Rob Lewis tells me.
I paid money to people to get information that would lead to somebody not being killed.
How many lives do you know that you saved through that work?
I know of one.
A soldier in the Ulster Defence Regiment, or UDR. Rob told them to go away for the weekend to escape an IRA plot.
And him and his family I think they went to Disneyland, actually, rather than stay at home with the potential of being killed.
Ian Hurst tells me how one of his agents helped save lives. Frank Hegarty was the Deputy of Weapons for the IRA in Derry, Northern Ireland's second biggest city. Frank gave up a large shipment of Libyan guns and ammunition, which the army then compromised. This reduced the number of attacks the IRA could carry out.
This guy was working genuinely, and he was a force of good. From a societal point of view.
Where's the morality of the idea that Frank Hegarty was sent in, told to go further and get involved in terrorist activities?
Okay. You've actually made what I think is the golden question. The morality of asking somebody to become involved in the commission of an unlawful offence.
There's a big part of this is if you shoot as a member of the IRA, then you're less likely to be suspected of being an informer.
And those are the moral quagmires that handlers face.
I'm trying to wade through this moral quagmire to answer a core question. What crimes can spies commit for the greater good of intelligence gathering? Where's the line, and who gets to decide? I've tracked down people from Special Branch, the section of the police that deals with counter-terrorism. They also ran spies in the paramilitaries, and I think they could help. There was a hierarchy of intelligence in Northern Ireland. The FRU reported to Special Branch, and MI5 was at the top. Ray White is the former head of Special Branch in Belfast.
You don't get information that you can use against a secret organisation by speaking to the milkman, the bread salesman, the postman, the local clergyman. You get it from within the organisation itself.
They couldn't use undercover police because of the close-knit nature of Northern Ireland's communities.
So the only viable option open to you was to speak to those that were, and recruit those that were already within the paramilitary organisations and paramilitary structures, and to try and persuade those people that, look, this is a sick ideology that you're following. We're trying to stop it. Are you prepared to take the risk and work with us to actually bring that about? But, I had no qualms, as it were, in speaking to those people and recruiting them and in remunerating them for the information that they give.
Like the FRU, Special Branch paid most of their agents what Ray calls healthy pocket money, around £40 a month.
But when you're a member of a paramilitary organisation, the real reality of it is you don't take your instructions from those that are deemed to be your handlers. Your instructions are taken from the leader of your organisation, and you will be a model terrorist. Now, that's the environment and the reality that you have to recognise and that you have to work within.
After all, spies knew that if they were discovered, the paramilitaries would
treat you in a way that will finish up with you in a body bag somewhere.
But surely that didn't mean every spy had a carte blanche to commit crimes. Ray puts me in touch with a former handler from Special Branch who was at the coalface. He's called Trevor. I can't use his last name for security reasons. Even to this day, he thinks he could be at risk of retaliation from the IRA. I go to his house on a cold, wintry day. There's his sea swimming boots and his towel hanging up from his swim. Hello. How are you doing? He's just been for a swim in the sea, but I'm bundled up. With a cup of tea in our hands, Trevor quickly admits
we broke the law every day we went into work.
just by meeting with people from terrorist organisations, they were breaking the law. He says he set clear parameters for his agents, boundaries they weren't allowed to cross.
He just doesn't have a free hand to do what he wants. He can't go around robbing and killing and murdering and bombing. And because he's passing it all to me and saying, that's all right, away and do it again. And that doesn't work like that.
Did you have any agents that you had to let go because what they were involved in was unconscionable?
Yes, we stood agents down. We did. Someone who wasn't towing the line was stepping way out beyond the pale. They were cut loose, and they were told when they're cut loose, you're now on your own. And the next time you get involved in any of that, you're going to jail.
I'm trying to work out where they drew that line. I want to know if Trevor and Ray would have run agents like Brian Nelson and Freddie Scappaticci. I ask Ray, would you have signed off on recruitment of someone like Freddie Scappaticci or Brian Nelson?
No. Given the role that Scappaticci was performing, in other words, he was killing people, he just wouldn't have fitted our bill in terms of what we were looking for.
Trevor agrees.
The fact that he was going out interrogating himself and killing people would have taken him beyond the pale. I'm just saying from a police officer's point of view, my bosses up the line would not have said, that's okay, let him kill away there, we're getting good intelligence.
And do you feel the same way about Brian Nelson?
Yes. You know, once they get up into that realms of doing, and you're aware of it, you can never stand over it. And if there's an investigation that comes out and it's proved that you were, you'll hang. You know, it's just not worth it.
Having said that, Trevor and Ray do both seem to see the value in running an agent like Steak Knife.
But when you've got a nugget like that, you're going to hold on to him as tight as you can.
He was run, I suppose, successfully by the military, and that they got a lot of useful enough intelligence from him.
I can in many ways understand why they were protecting him.
I ask Ray again, would he have refused to work with a spy because of the number of killings they'd been involved in?
Maybe we don't seem to have any morals in this thing, but we would have recruited people who had been through the courts and had been sentenced for involvement in explosions or murders and things of that nature. You're not dealing with people with clean morals and high ethical standards and things of that nature. They've already, as were bought into the sick ideology of terrorism, that killing your fellow countryman is a means of advancing some political cause or some national cause.
And here's the thing. I don't buy the argument that Freddie Scappaticci and Brian Nelson were rogue agents, outliers who committed atrocities while their fellow spies kept their hands clean. And that's because I've discovered there weren't any rules or laws governing the work of the FRU and Special Branch.
We were given an assurance that there was a legal basis for asking somebody to become involved in a prescribed organisation.
Like the IRA or UDA. Ian Hurst has since found out that wasn't the case.
Let me just see if I can dig it out.
He rifles through a pile of documents he's brought with him and pulls out a House of Commons report from 2022. It's 50 pages long.
And it's titled Investigation of Former Armed Forces Personnel Who Served in Northern Ireland. And there's very interesting little 2 paragraphs. Military personnel are at all times subject to both service law and civilian law, wherever they are serving in the world. As such, armed force personnel are not immune from prosecution for offences committed while serving.
There was no provision for soldiers in the FRU or their agents to break the law, but they did, time and time again.
Your government was asking people like me to operate unlawfully. In the same way James Bond doesn't have a licence to kill, neither does a soldier, or indeed to break the law.
That meant when they asked spies to join the IRA and get closer to the action,
we are consciously acquiescing in a conspiracy. We are conspiring with that individual in the belief that it's in the interests of society for us to gain actionable intelligence. And as Parliament have set out, they don't want you to break the law.
When Ian's spy, Frank Hegarty, who was in charge of weapons in Derry, progressed through the IRA, he broke one law after another.
I failed to understand how I could conspire with somebody to bring in massive shipments of Libyan arms unlawfully, and it be lawful.
And so a lawless vacuum was created.
That sounds a bit Wild West. It's the absence of rules and regulations. If you don't have set in a line, which is the acceptable, invariably it will get moved. It gets eroded. That line in the sand gets to a point where it blows up.
John Ware, the reporter who worked for Panorama, believes everyone involved in this secret world in Northern Ireland knew just how illegal it was.
The heads of the three intelligence services, MI5, the Army, and the police, were all acutely conscious of the fact that they were running agents outside of a legal framework.
The agencies could have set their own limits for how deep their spies could go. That could have prevented the likes of Freddie Scapatici and Brian Nelson becoming mass murderers. But John says it isn't that easy.
And it's all very well to say, once you sense that the agent is about to cause harm, you need to get him out and replace him. Well, sure, but it takes time to recruit agents. It takes time for them to get indoctrinated into and the trust of the organisation. I mean, you're pretty soon going to end up with not very much intelligence. There just isn't a way around this.
The conundrum eventually became too much for Ray White at the top of Special Branch.
We reached a point where we didn't want to live in that grey area any longer.
The opportunity to speak up presented itself to Ray.
In 1986 and 87, I think it was the Christmas of that year, I had a conversation with the Prime Minister of the day.
Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret Thatcher. She makes a Christmas visit to sort of rally the troops.
Ray caught a moment alone with Thatcher.
And I very briefly outlined to her that I felt that, technically speaking, I could be committing about 5 different criminal acts in relation to every source that I was managing.
What would those have been?
First and foremost is we're asking the individual to be a member of a criminal organisation or paramilitary organisation, aiding and abetting that individual in relation to, as it were, the role that he was asked, counselling and procuring him in relation to how he could do his bit. I was conspiring with him to actually arrange the arrest of his colleagues, and if he needed tools and equipment to do the job that he was asked to do, I was providing those pieces of equipment. I was aiding and abetting him in that fashion. But I was conspiring with him to be a member of a paramilitary organisation.
Thatcher told Ray she'd look into it. John Ware learnt what happened next.
Civil servants then sat down and thought, essentially, how can we make murder not a criminal offence? And they sat there with, wet towels around their heads for 2 or 3 years and came up and said, you know what, we can't. And it ends up with a pithy note saying, well, it seems to me the rule is
get on and do what we were doing, but don't get ourselves caught.
Eventually, an agent did get caught. Brian Nelson. Detective John Stevens had come to Belfast with one rule. The law was the law, and it shouldn't be broken. Not by fighters, not by agents, and not by soldiers. No one should be allowed to kill for the greater good of intelligence.
The mix between the law and unlawfulness was, you couldn't separate the two. How on the earth do you run agents who are paid by the Crown, are run by the Crown, and should be obeying the law? And if they don't obey the law and they're arrested and charged, then the battle commences.
Vince McFadden and John Stevens had uncovered a swathe of evidence against Brian Nelson, enough that he was going to court. And it wouldn't just be him in the dock, but the whole of the FRU. Gordon Kerr's Maverick unit would be thrust into the spotlight and Gordon himself forced to testify. The whole lawless system would finally be exposed. But would justice actually be served?
This was not going to go well. Right from the outset, things are going to go wrong.
Coming up on Bed of Lies.
When Gordon Kerr got up and said he'd save hundreds of lives, I didn't know whether to cry or laugh, to be honest.
Mr. Speaker, the collusion demonstrated beyond any doubt by Sir Desmond, which included the involvement of state agencies in murder, is totally unacceptable. Collusion should never, ever happen.
The number of agents that was being run was enormous.
It's a terrible stain on the justice system that this was never dealt with properly. The steak knife story became a diversion.
Cara, hi. I think we can now show just how far the British government has gone to protect agents involved in murder.
Bed of Lies is written by me, Cara McGugan, and produced by Sarah Peters at Tuning Fork Productions. The executive producers are Louisa Wells and Adelie Pojman-Ponte. Script editing by Venetia Rainey. Fact-checking by Mick Brown. Sound design by Peregrine Andrews. With thanks to Ryan Gudge, Louis Brady and Theodora Laludis. For more of my in-depth reporting, my book, The Poison Line, Life and Death in the Infected Blood Scandal, is out now with Penguin. If you haven't already done so, listen to the award-winning first 2 series of Bed of Lies on this feed, in which I investigate 2 very different scandals.